There are new reports suggesting that we might finally be getting close to a resolution on the Damian Lillard trade situation this offseason. Now, last time we talked about this, we talked about the fact that Damian Lillard's agent was going around the league and telling teams that were not the Miami Heat that could potentially be interested in trading for Damian Lillard, that Dame himself was not interested in playing for those teams and that he would be unhappy if he ended up on those teams. And that was a dangerous precedent to set. And since then, the league has come out and basically said, that's not okay. You're not allowed to do that. And they didn't necessarily say that that's exactly what Damian Lillard and his team and his agent were doing, but they said that if that was to happen and happen in the future, that there would be punishment from the league. So essentially they are saying, you're not allowed to do that. You can't just go and tell, the Sixers, the Clippers, whatever these other teams are that could potentially be trading for Dame, you can't just go tell them he's not gonna play for you guys. When you've already requested a trade from your initial team, you can't just force yourself to one particular team. However, he probably is going to end up forcing his way to one particular team, because the reporting that we've been getting recently is that even though other teams around the league have been made aware of the fact that Damian Lillard would actually play for them and he wouldn't just hold out because the league is just not going to allow for that, there don't appear to be a ton of teams lining up to take that risk anyway. It seems like most teams around the league are seeing this situation as, yeah, it's not necessarily fair that Dame only wants to go to Miami, but at the end of the day, that's probably what's going to end up happening. There's a couple of different reasons for that. One is, even if the league says it's not okay to put out these messages that he wouldn't be happy playing elsewhere, those teams are still probably going to believe that, and teams don't want to trade significant assets in exchange for a guy that just isn't going to be happy playing with their franchise. The other part of this is Dame is getting older. He is on a massive contract, and you have to question if there are other teams around the league that are going to be willing to trade all that stuff in exchange, not just for a guy that might not be happy when he gets there, but for a guy that is older, that isn't a very good defensive player, is actually an awful defensive player, and is on this huge contract. Maybe some of those teams are starting to think that even independent of whether or not he would be happy there, if it's worth giving up a ton in exchange for Dame, especially if it doesn't allow them to compete immediately the way that it wouldn't for teams like Brooklyn, for example, depending on how the rest of their roster shakes out. Even if they traded all that stuff for Dame, him alongside Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, like, it's a good team, but it's not a contending team, so is it really worth it for them? Now, the counter to that would be a team like Philadelphia that is in a very desperate situation with James Harden, may or may not be refusing to show up to camp, the Joel Embiid situation, hoping that he remains happy. That could be a team that could see this as a worthwhile risk. But what it seems like we're leading to is Miami being the only team that Dame ultimately is going to end up on, and now we're just trying to figure out what exactly the trade package is going to look like, because you can look at this from two different perspectives if you're the Heat. If you know that it's very unlikely that any of these other teams are going to actually trade for Damian Lillard, then you don't really have to offer a ton in exchange. Theoretically, if you're not bidding against anybody else, then you don't have to offer all the stuff. You can offer a lot of the stuff, but you don't have to offer every single thing that you have. The counter to that would be, well, you're never 100% certain of that, and Miami has built their offseason around this idea of getting Damian Lillard, and if they don't end up doing that, you have no idea where you're going to be next season. Not to mention there's a handful of guys on the roster that knew that they were on the verge of being traded, and if you miss out on Dame, that's incredibly damaging to what you're doing. And so there's a lot of different ways to look at this for Miami, and ultimately what this comes down to, I think, is Portland is just waiting on all the stuff offer from Miami. I think it's clear that no matter how much they tried to drum up on their interest from other teams around the league, teams are just nervous about trading for someone of Dame's age, of his contract, and him potentially being unhappy regardless of what they may or may not say publicly. And so at this point, they're just waiting on Miami to say, here's all of the stuff. And at that point, once Miami says you can have all the picks, all the swaps, you can have the guy that we just drafted in the first round, you can have Jovic we drafted in the first round last year, you can have a first that we're getting in exchange for Tyler Hero from this other team. Once that construction comes together, it seems like Dame is going to end up in Miami, and Portland can finally move on from this with Scoot Henderson and the rest of their very talented young roster. And that seems like the place that we are heading to. I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't exactly know what the holdup is, unless Portland is just really trying to cling to the fact that they feel like they can still find another team out there to increase Miami's offer. But ultimately, the most that Miami can offer is pretty fair value in exchange for Dame, and they can't go above that. And so even if another team shows up, I doubt that they're going to want to offer as much as Miami is, because they don't know if Dame is actually going to be happy once they trade for him. And I say all that to say, eventually, hopefully soon, this is going to get remedied. This is going to get fixed, and Portland and Miami can both move on, and then we'll just have the James Harden situation floating around trying to figure out what's going to happen there. And the question that I have is this going to set a new precedent moving forward around the league? Is this going to be the new norm, where not only can a player request a trade with multiple years left on their contract when they just signed multiple multiple different extensions over the last couple of seasons. Is this going to set a new precedent where not only can you do that, but you can pick your team as well? You can, as much as the league wants to say you can't do it, you can go around the league and say, hey, we don't want to play here, 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 here. We only want to play for this one particular team. It happened with Bradley Beal because he had the no trade clause and he could pick his team. And it's almost like Damian Lillard has a no trade clause in this situation as well, because if this is going to be the norm, that's obviously not very good for the health of the league moving forward. Now, the counter to that is if Damian Lillard was 27 years old on a regular max contract or on a fair deal or whatever the case may be, I think a lot of teams would be interested. And the thing that's kind of confusing all of this is, are teams not interested in Dame because he's not interested in playing for them, or are teams not interested in Dame because of his age and his contract and how he would potentially fit with them trying to win a title? Or more likely, is it a combination of both? Are teams nervous about the contract and the age, as well as nervous about whether he's going to be happy and whether that's going to actually allow them to compete for a title? And so because of all those factors, I doubt this is going to become the new normal. Like, players having a wish list of teams that they'd like to be traded to, that's already normal. That's been a thing for a few years now. But the one team only rule, I don't think that's going to be a thing moving forward. The league's not going to allow for that. They're going to regulate that, and you're still going to have to put multiple teams on your list unless you end up with a no trade clause. But because of what happened with Bradley Beal this offseason, no player is ever going to get a no trade clause ever for the rest of the history of the NBA. You might as well take it out of the CBA. It might as well not exist. So ultimately, I'm glad that this, it appears, is going to be fixed pretty soon. We haven't had any new rumors in terms of any other team stepping in and trying to go and get Dame. It seems clear that Miami is the team, that they have the assets and the motivation to make it work. And now I'm just interested to see what this Heat team looks like this upcoming season, presumably without Tyler Hero, but with Damian Lillard in his place, a team that just made the finals, a team that we know is a very, very tough postseason team with a little bit of extra, a lot more actually, extra offensive firepower with Dame alongside Jimmy Butler and Bam. How does Dame fit into their defensive structure? What does all that stuff look like? Now I'm starting to get really excited about what that means, because it's pretty clear that at this point, eventually, someday, Damian Lillard is going to be a member of the Miami Heat. Now, the only other possibility that I see here is if Portland just gets really upset about how this whole situation has played out. They've been loyal to Dame. He's not returning that loyalty in this situation by forcing himself to one particular team. They could get kind of petty here and say, you know what? We're not sending you to Miami. We're not doing it. We're waiting for another team to offer something in exchange. We're going to take this into training camp. We're going to take this into the season. We know we're not going to be good anyway. You're the one that's on a schedule. You're the one that's on a timeline. You're the one that wants to get to a new team and try and win a title. And we're just not happy with what Miami is offering. That's the only other option that I see here where he doesn't end up with the Heat within the next month or so, is if Portland just decides they're not going to be the team that lets this happen, that lets the guy force his way to only one team with multiple years left on his contract. And if that's the decision they make, maybe eventually they're, whether even all the way up to the trade deadline, there might be a team that's willing to offer a ton more because they're way better than they thought they would be, or they feel like they have a legitimate chance to win a title, or maybe the Sixers get even more desperate than they are right now and there's some kind of resolution to the Harden thing at that point as well. That's the only other outcome here, is either it's going to happen to Miami relatively soon, or Portland is just going to say, no, we're not doing it. We're not sending you to Miami. We're getting a better offer elsewhere. And at that point, they'd just be taking the risk to wait until training camp and into the season. That would be a really interesting possibility, but ultimately I feel like it's pretty unlikely.